What's up, guys? Welcome into the Fireside Bears YouTube channel. You can follow us on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram at Fireside Bears. My name is Usayd Koshul. You can follow me on Twitter at Usayd Koshul. Follow my co-host Max Smith on Twitter as well at Max Smith ESM. Before we get into all the free agency frenzy that's going on, make sure you have gone ahead, like this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the YouTube channel because we've got a lot of really good content coming your way. Just 24/7, 365. That's how we do things here at Fireside Bears. I mean, we talk about, the NFL never sleeps. Well, we don't sleep here at Fireside Bears, and the Bears fan base doesn't sleep because I know Max was one of the people today who was jokingly putting tweets out about the signing of Larry Ogunjobi and how it's the most terrible thing on the planet. But we're going to break it all down for you. What's up, Max?
There's a lot going on in the league, but this is our special time of year, our second season, really. I'm excited. I like Twitter's reaction, and primarily I love the fact that majority of fans like to pretend they're general managers of a team. And whenever a player that they really like doesn't get signed by their favorite team, they immediately think it's the end of the world. There's a lot to break down on this Larry Ogunjobi signing, and from a multitude of angles, from the cap perspective, from the roster perspective, from the schemes perspective. There's just a lot to look at. But forewarning, I'm pro in this position. I like the signing. I think it's a great signing. I think the contract is going to be more favorable than some people are suggesting on Twitter and overreacting, looking at the sticker price. Again, a lot of this is agent speak so that they can drive up the market and get their other clients some more money at the end of the day. So let's hold our horses a little bit. But all in all, I'm pretty excited for what just happened and what's going to happen next.
Look, we're gonna get into that signing in just a moment, but I think people also have to understand. I believe the number set at like 2.5% in terms of how much money an agent gets every single year from a player's contract. So if you're a player, you're trying to get as much money as possible. But if you're an agent, you're trying to maximize out that 2.5% as well. So that's why you're gonna drive the price up too. But Ogunjobi, I think comes over from the Cincinnati Bengals. Certainly a polarizing signing, and I'm saying this just 5 to 6 hours after he officially signed with the Bears. Well, he hasn't put pen to paper yet, but he's going to sign with the Bears soon, so it's going to be official pretty soon. But the point is, it's been a polarizing 5 to 6 hours for the Bears. It's clear Ogunjobi is loved by some fans, hated by others. Some people are wondering why even go ahead and waste money on a defensive player just 96 hours after you traded away Khalil Mack. Combine this with the fact that it's an offensive driven league that's also driven by elite quarterback play. You would think that you're going to tear the defense down and use those resources to invest in the offense. But Ogunjobi gets a 3-year, $40.5 million deal, about $26.5 million guaranteed, right around there. We're still waiting for kind of the bonuses and a lot of other prorated bonuses, signing bonus, things like that, the official numbers to come in, which we will hopefully have by Wednesday or Thursday. But look, when you look at this signing, was it a quote unquote splash in free agency in the first wave? Yes and no. And I say yes and no, Max, simply because I think when you look at this team, we've talked all offseason about how the Bears' basic strategy is going to be rebuilding the offense and putting more resources into the offense, but then banking on Matt Eberflus's ability to coach up the defense. And I said this 2 months ago, and I'm going to say it again. When Eberflus was in Indianapolis, he didn't have a single first round pick on that roster outside of one that the Colts had actually drafted. Xavier Rhodes, I know, was a first round pick in 2013, but Xavier Rhodes was also the Minnesota Vikings first round draft pick. So over a 4-year span in Indy, Eberflus basically had a hand in drafting 19 players. 18 of them were still with the team by the end of 2021. So it's not hard to see here why the Bears are exactly going ahead and basically banking on Eberflus to be able to coach up the defense no matter who's there. But when you also look at this signing, and I said this today on Twitter, that this is one of those signings where may not be the most popular, but it's about doing what's right. And doing what's right is finding the ideal three technique for your defense to go ahead and make sure that you have something that every NFL team craves, which is an interior pass rusher. Because defensive tackles oftentimes are just run stoppers. But if you can get your hands on a guy that is able to basically rush from the interior, it creates opportunities for pretty much everybody around. So Ogunjobi, bit of a polarizing signing. Obviously, we're gonna have to see how things play out in the long run because he did have foot surgery this offseason. He did go ahead and basically he's coming off a career year with the Browns, which is why he got as much money as he did. It comes out to like 10 or 11 million a year, I believe. But the Bears are basically staking their chips into Ogunjobi so that he can become a solid player for them and just kind of begin this retooling of the defense.
Yeah, I want to bring up something that a lot of fans seem to be forgetting, which is Eberflus got something while he was with the Colts that completely changed the identity of that defense. And that was another first rounder from the San Francisco 49ers that just happened to be DeForest Buckner, right? His addition, he's a three tech, he's an incredible pass rusher. He's one of, if not the best interior outside of Aaron Donald, but DeForest Buckner is up next because he's just ready to explode. He already kind of did last year, but I don't know. I love him. He's incredible. He's an amazing talent. But Eberflus needs an explosive, dynamic three tech to anchor the interior line, because then the edges are able to mess around more, maybe even kind of play a little bit back. When we're looking at this potential new three-set linebacker, they're able to worry less about stopping the run, more so able to get back into that coverage scheme personnel, where, again, we already have some tools, a.k.a. Roquan Smith, who replaced Khalil Mack here over the past couple of days, can really shine and show why he's one of the better linebackers in the league. So this was going to happen regardless, right? It happened with Indy, and now it happened in Chicago, that we found an up-and-coming, he's 27 years old. He's just as old as Eddie Goldman. But if you compare the stats, Larry's been consistent. Eddie hasn't. So let me just read off this past year, which people are really looking at as kind of his breakout year. 7 sacks. Do you know how many sacks DeForest Buckner had this year? 7. So same amount of sacks between these two guys. 16 quarterback hits, 12 tackles for loss, 49 tackles overall, 29 of which were solo. And on average, he meets the ball carrier 1.5 yards past the line of scrimmage. Eddie Goldman, 3.1. So this is an objective upgrade, right? Flus looked at Eddie and said, you know what? I don't think he has what it takes to cut it in this defense. And that's been kind of the tone that Eberflus and Poles have walked into. It said, look, we have these expectations for this scheme that we are going to put in. If you do not fit that scheme, or we don't think that you do, you have a place in this league, but it's just not with us. And I think that's such a great mentality to have, because you're looking specifically for players that, one, will fit your scheme, but two, that you're going to put in positions to succeed. So a lot of people were suggesting that, Larry wasn't used correctly in Cleveland. Well, then he hopped over to Cincy, had a fantastic year on a contract. Bengals balled out for 1-year contracts. Look where it got them in the Super Bowl. And Larry played a really, really, really big role in anchoring that line and helping the Bengals defense kind of surprise some people. So again, this was a matter of when, not if, and when we were going to make a splash for a 3-tech. And I honestly can't think of a better move to make an upgrade at that position. Now, we can talk about contract all we want. It hasn't been officially published yet, so we don't really know, like you said, what those bonuses, what those other things look like. But the real thing you have to ask yourself, like as a fan, and you're objectively looking at this signing from a fan perspective, is, one, where could this have money been spent in the offense? Because we thought Poles was going to come in and really focus on the offense. We've even said that on the show. So it was a little surprising to see the money that we saved from Khalil Mack immediately go at the 3-tech with Larry. And two, what else is going to come on the defense now, right? How much money does this allow us to spend at positions like cornerback or D-back, where we're desperately short? We only have one safety essentially on the roster at the moment. We haven't brought anybody back or looked at anyone else. There's so many holes at this defense that this new regime is really, really, really trying to tighten up. Because again, Flus is a defense first coach. That doesn't mean that he's going to primarily forget the offense, right? But we just saw Christian Kirk sign the third largest wide receiver contract in the league. This is a guy who started 4 games last year. So this market, who knows what's going to happen with the offense side of the ball. But at least the Bears are able to make a splash at the nose tackle and able to do it early.
And look, I'm not going to sit here and say I love the signing. I'm not going to sit here and say I hate the signing, because that would technically, on my part, be biased and lean towards one side or the other. And I'm just here as a journalist to provide objective analysis and commentary regarding what the Bears are doing. But you look at this team, and it's kind of been like reduce, reuse, recycle. Every single year, what happens is the Bears seem to be, and sorry, I'm looking down at my phone because all the deals are coming in. So busy person. Okay, I've tweeted at least 150 times today. So yeah, we're just gonna leave it at that. But the point I'm making is this: is that the Bears have basically shown us that you can spend big in free agency, but it's not always going to equate to winning. Okay. And you look at other teams such as the Jacksonville Jaguars, who everybody right now, I'm going to tell you, is going to label as winners on paper. They went out and got Brandon Sheriff. They signed Evan Ingram, went out and basically franchise tag Cam Robinson, paid Christian Kirk. There's something to kind of be said for all this, is that when you look at a lot of the Bears free agency targets, like Ryan Jensen, who's only back in Tampa Bay because of Tom Brady. So that's not something you can really blame Brian Poles for. But then you look at the signing of a guy like a Brian Allen, who's coming in at about $8-9 million a year. I know one of the friends of our shows that's currently on the Jets beat right now. He'll be back on sometime over the summer to break down Zach Wilson's rookie season and how the Jets are doing. Kind of said and tweeted this today that the Jets basically are shying away from Bears guard James Daniels because he's too expensive. The point I'm making is that teams that just throw out money erratically in free agency do so as a result of draft misses, because they just view being able to sign a guy in free agency as a way of making up for a mistake. That's what free agency basically is sometimes. It's you're overpaying. Now, I for one am actually looking at this team. It's kind of good that Poles didn't go ahead and get super aggressive for an Alex Kappa or a Brian Allen or even a guy like a Christian Kirk, because ultimately at the end of the day, we have to understand one thing, is that I understand the Bears are going to have whatever $100-something million in cap space. That's certainly going to change with some extensions that are coming and more player signings, because the Bears only have like 25 or 26 players under contract for 2023. But what also has to factor in is this, it's good to see the Bears not being so crazy aggressive and kind of letting the market settle, because I tweeted this right now and I'm going to stick by it. Is it disappointing the Bears haven't gotten their hands on an offensive lineman and it's basically 7 p.m. Eastern time? Yeah, it is. And Ryan Poles is going to look incredibly bad, because you can't talk about building up the offensive line and not have another veteran presence on the OL. But at the end of the day, letting the market settle is also good, because now we're seeing reports that Leo Collins is likely to be released. Sure, Christian Kirk got whatever, anywhere between 18 and 21 million dollars a year, which just means Allen Robinson's the happiest person on the planet right now. Devontae Adams is looking at that and saying, yes, let's go. But ultimately, at the end of the day, there's guys like Juju Smith-Schuster, there's guys like DJ Chark, there's a couple of veteran offensive linemen like Leo Collins that are expected to be available, that you look at and you say, okay, you know what, that's not someone I would sign in the first wave of free agency right now. But hey, by Thursday, Friday, Saturday, that's definitely a signing that the Bears need to look into. And let me just say James Daniels for a real quick second, because he's technically one of the Bears' own free agents, is that even James Daniels is a name that I would look at and say, all right, Ryan Poles, you let James hit the open market. You know he can fit in this outside zone scheme. You know these Iowa offensive linemen are so scheme versatile. He's got the mobility. If he can clean up some of the inconsistencies at just 24, 25 years old, the sky's the limit for him. And so now you're thinking about the possibility of, do you bring James Daniels back on a much cheaper deal, cheaper than expected? That's a question too. So the Bears are going to have their options here in free agency. It's just a matter of letting the market settle.
Yeah, I'm not a journalist, so bring back James Daniels. It's stupid to let him walk, and I'll say that and take that with my grave. I am so happy that the Jets balked on James Daniels. Either one, he asked way too much money, or two, they used his price point to negotiate Tomlinson out of San Francisco. But who knows, right? Here's to your point, 100% is we shouldn't be too upset that the guys that we kind of knew we weren't going to get, we didn't end up getting. Bears actively pursued Brian Allen. It just didn't happen. He stayed with the Rams. Rams probably offered him more money because, and he already lives there. He's maybe starting a family. He just won a Super Bowl. Maybe he feels like he can win another. There's a lot going on there, right? And yeah, he's a hometown kid. He grew up in Hinsdale. Oh, well, of course that feels good to us because we're like, oh, yeah, he's a local kid. He's going to come back and play for the Bears. Guess what? It didn't happen. Oh, well, we pick up the pieces and we move on, right? And there are just as talented and potentially more talented players in the draft and in the free agency that we could, they may not be day one impacts like he could be, but I swear that's what's going on in Hallis Hall right now. Just because I can't rationalize it any other way is that, and again, this could be me coping, but they would rather build through the draft than continuously buy these, Brian Allen's not old. Some of these guys aren't old, but aging offensive linemen who may not have that scheme versatility that you mentioned, that may not be able to plug and play like Ryan Poles and Flus and Getsy want, right? So there's all of these question marks going around, and for us to immediately pick up and go, well, I didn't get the guy that I liked. Now I hate this team. Is a little short-sighted. Now, if I was Ryan Poles, I'd pick up the phone and I'd call DJ Chark's agent right now and I'd say, whatever number you want, we'll make it happen. I swear. Like I will put, again, this is my guy. If we get DJ Chark, Justin Fields is going to have a fantastic season with Darnell Mooney and DJ Chark at the White House. It's just going to happen because they're just so good. And then you pick up a wide receiver in the draft, maybe a Bell, speedster. Let's get it. Let's go. Justin Fields is an incredible second year. But here's what's different. And this is something that I think that's really interesting is Ryan Pace, right, when he had his or Matt Nagy first year with Ryan Pace, Matt Nagy, and that Trubisky second season, they brought in a good amount of offensive weapons for him, right? They brought in Taylor Gabriel, they brought in Allen Robinson, they brought in Trey Burton. Here in comes, Tariq Cohen. Of course, they draft him, but they give him a bunch of weapons, and they say, "All right, Mitch, we went out and we got you a good plethora of speed, possession, strength. Let's do this." And these are kind of Nagy's guys. And the offense doesn't really do much, right? We spend a lot in free agency, and some of these guys don't even come back. They underperform. We spend a lot of money. Nothing really happens. So I mean that's here's what I think is really interesting as well is Eddie Goldman was a pace guy, brought in the pace regime, basically brought in like a Fangio type nose tackle, which he did his job well in his first year. And then he had some issues during the COVID seasons with not playing. And, I guess he just couldn't come back. But Poles has gotten rid of Pace's guys at the defense. And he's already bringing in replacements for Pace's guys and are bringing in replacements that fit Flus's scheme. So this is, I think, a departure from normal, right? That we're seeing an active front office and head coach collaborate and removing the old regime's pieces and plugging in new ones that will be more conducive and lead toward that new coaching staff's success. I don't know if this is something that Ryan Pace did. If he did, he didn't do it very often. It was more out of necessity, right? We could have easily re-signed these guys and say, welcome back to Chicago. This is your new head coach. Let's get it. Let's have a good year. They didn't do that. They said, you know what? No, we're going to look out and we're going to see if we can find better talent that is more suited for these new offensive defensive staffs. And again, I think this is new. I think this is a fresh breath of air for Chicago fans. I think this is certainly a new wind in Hallis Hall, and we just have to wait and see how it plays out with the rest of free agency.
Yeah, look, you have to take a wait and see approach, and I certainly look at the Bears right now, and I say, hey, listen, that contract Brian Allen got was a bit more team friendly than a lot of people thought it was going to be. But then again, if you're Brian Allen, who's also a Chicago area native and a Hinsdale Central grad, I totally understand why he didn't want to go ahead and kind of come back to Chicago, because there's a advantage and disadvantage of all these free agents. Now, a lot of people were basically like, let's see the Bears go after Brian Allen and sign him. And they Bears were legitimately in on Brian Allen. But what matters here is this, is that Brian Allen, people don't talk about his significant injury history. So I don't blame Ryan Poles for not getting as kind of competitive as Poles wanted it to. I don't know where the Bears kind of ended up in the standings. When you look at the wide receiver market, it's kind of the same thing. All right, listen, Christian Kirk's never had 1,000 yards in a season. He's always had some solid quarterback play basically for 3 of his 4 years in the NFL. Christian Kirk's had really good quarterback play. And I know you could go ahead and sit here and say, oh, well, there's an argument to be made that Christian Kirk's targets were down because of guys like DeAndre Hopkins. Ultimately, you look at Christian Kirk, he got basically wide receiver one money as a wide receiver 3 or 4 on the Arizona Cardinals. Ultimately, you have to look at this right here too. Is Poles talked about valuation versus evaluation, and certain positions are naturally just going to be more expensive than others. So the wide receiver position right now, I mentioned this a bit earlier, but I'm going to bring it back because on Sunday there's a giant debate about whether or not the Bears should go after Juju Smith-Schuster. First things first, if your evaluation and criteria for a player starts and ends with whatever that player posts on social media, especially TikTok, which is blowing up right now, this is why you should follow us there, then you're doing something wrong. But the point I'm making more so is just ultimately the fact that there are going to be a lot of free agents that the Bears are going to be able to get their hands on that are going to be significantly cheaper. When you look at this team, it makes more sense to continue to build through the draft anyway. When we look at, there's a trend around the NFL, right? When you look at a lot of these really good teams, there's been a couple trades mixed in there, and I'll use the Chiefs as a main example. Have the Chiefs traded and gotten aggressive over the last couple of years? Yeah, they've thrown out draft picks here and there for guys like Frank Clark, but a majority of their building has been done through the draft, specifically on day 2 and 3. I had a conversation with someone today who asked me, hey, listen, why is it that the Rams have no first round picks, but the Rams are basically able to go ahead and able to bring in these really solid players and keep winning? Why? Because they don't have a first round pick, but they do have enough day 2 and day 3 picks that they do a good job of developing. And then they find those underrated UDFA ads, those undrafted free agents, and they develop those guys as well. The Rams are not the Rams, the Chiefs. These are teams, the Packers even. These are teams that are not notorious spenders in free agency because they draft so well. Having an elite quarterback like a Matt Stafford, a Patrick Mahomes, or an Aaron Rodgers certainly kind of helps your case because it covers up holes. But for the most part, it's just about drafting and developing. In this league, if you draft and develop over a 2-year period and you do it real well, literally the sky's the limit for you. And that's what Ryan Poles ultimately wants to do here. But the thing with this free agency class is this, is that there is enough depth in the middle parts of the class and towards the bottom to the point where the Bears could go ahead, right, and still get a couple quality signings.
Yeah, I mean, depth, especially on the offensive line, is huge. But I mean, I'm glad you brought that up because I was going to, if you aren't, that the Chiefs aren't heavy spenders in the free agency and don't tend to build that way. Yeah, sure, they've traded for some players in the past, but again, it's not like they really make big splashes, such as other teams. I mean, I don't know what Jacksonville's doing while we're recording this. I guess they signed Evan Ingram, which is interesting. But let's surround Trevor Lawrence with a bunch of mediocre pieces and see what happens, I guess, is the Jags strategy here. Shout out Doug Peterson. But no, I mean, I would prefer more offensive linemen in the draft through the free agency. I know that this next year, this next season is nothing more than an evaluation. an introduction. Welcome to this new scheme. Welcome to this new staff. Let's see what players can make it, see what players can't. And then we stack up on more picks, more cap space in 2023. And then we start seeing the development and the real process happening. We still have a couple of years with Justin Fields before we actually have to pay him real money. So it's really taking advantage of that and seeing exactly how competitive we can be with what we have, while also making slow additions across the way. But hopefully, when we come back later this week and record another one, I can announce that DJ Chark is a Chicago Bear. But I don't think it's going to happen. But I will pray every night that it does.
I will go ahead and say this as we kind of begin to wrap up, is that because we're going to have more of these videos throughout the week, guys. Today was kind of a lighter day with some of the signings and stuff. I mean, the Bears only had one real signing. That's certainly going to change as the market continues to kind of settle here. But I honestly think the Bears are going to be prime contenders for Juju Smith-Schuster instead of DJ Chark. And the reason I say that is because DJ Chark is great, but also I'm worried of DJ Chark because of the ankle injury. And quite frankly, I just do not want to give money out to, if I was in Ryan Pohl's chair, which my chair is clearly not the caliber of his, by the way. Neither is my desk. So I literally have 2 desks from Target set up here and $100 monitor from Office Depot. But the point I'm making, okay, is this, is that I would not want to go ahead and pay or dish out big money to a player that is coming off an injured season. Because again, the Bears, once again, it's reduce, reuse, recycle, wash, rinse, repeat. They did that 4 years ago in free agency. And again, Allen Robinson's been a phenomenal player. But Allen Robinson was kind of one of the exceptions to a player being so damn good that he was going to get a bag, even though he's coming off ACL injuries and ACL surgeries. Whereas you look at a guy like a DJ Chark's not necessarily even in the same category as Allen Robinson. And then you look at his ankle injury and you don't know how he's going to perform in 2022. You look at Allen Robinson's ACL injury in 2018, A-Rob's numbers were massively down because he hadn't played football in basically a year. And so when you look at those two situations, I would just stay away from DJ Chark for that regard, which I think is a totally valid concern, by the way, and instead go ahead and just kind of push my money on the table for Juju Smith-Schuster, who I know may not be able to vertically stretch the field like some of these other wide receivers like a Chark or a Byron Pringle, but I certainly think he can be a really solid asset in the short and the intermediate passing game, which quite frankly complements guys like Darnell Mooney well. And if you're wondering, the Bears already have 2 vertical stretchers, 2 wide receivers that are able to vertically stretch the field. I should say vertically stretchers because that's technically like a paramedics term. But the Bears have 2 really good receivers that can stretch the field vertically in Daz Newsome along with Darnell Mooney, who I think Daz just needs a legitimate shot to show what he can do. But the point I'm making is that I think it's going to be more so Juju Smith-Schuster than it would be DJ Chark. But then again, at the end of the day, the Bears can't go wrong with either. Speaking objectively, of course.
Right. I mean, I like DJ because, again, he is very similar to Allen Robinson in a lot of the metrics. Ankle injury is always something to be worried about, and that comparison is totally fair. I just think that there's a lot of untapped potential there and a lot of raw talent. It's not like he had a somewhat surprisingly good Blake Bortles throwing to him, right? He had kind of a rougher stick than Allen Robinson did during his time in Jacksonville. But I think there's pure opportunity. I see one on the rise and one that's kind of just still figuring it out, unfortunately, for Juju. But again, like you said, can't go wrong with either. Won't be upset with either. Just hope it's one of them or, some sort of second tier wide receiver, please. That's all I ask.
Yeah, again, look, if you're the Bears at this point, you're not going to go out and sign any wide receiver, but you need to go ahead and you need to be smart about how you spend and allocate your money, because that certainly was something that the Bears were not. The Bears have never really been smart about how they spend and allocate their money. Even their draft picks, let's just call it how it is. But this is one of those scenarios that you are basically looking at this free agency period as, hey, what is out there to allow the roster to basically take shape so that over the next couple of years we can continue to focus on building the essential parts. And the essential parts do include wide receiver and offensive line, but depth is such a big thing in today's NFL that it's like if you don't have roster depth, one player could go down and your entire team's going to take a hit. That's just the new NFL now.
Yeah, I think that's a major concern, and that's something we talked about at the beginning of this season. Was specifically at the cornerback position. Was wow, there is no depth at this position here, or is there really talent at the front? Which should be a clear issue. But unfortunately, this free agent market, at least at the D-back, is kind of thin. The draft class is good, and watching the scouting combine, it made me think maybe we should start bringing on drafting D-backs and making them wide receivers, or maybe we should take wide receivers and start making them D-backs, because the speed's there, the physical, attributes are there. Let's just give them a year or two and train them into D-backs, because there's just such a large amount of fast, good hand wide receivers in this draft that you're going to see a bunch of value even in the undrafted free agent market. And some of those guys really genuinely could be kind of trained into a defensive back role. I mean, they won't be as good as day one impactors who've been doing it their whole life. But then again, Devin Hester is an example of pure athleticism can really turn into anything on a football field. So that's all I have to say about that.
Anyways, guys, make sure you have commented, and subscribed to our YouTube channel. Make sure you're following myself and Max on Twitter at Usayd Coach and at Max Smith ESM. Check out Fireside Bears on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram at Fireside Bears. I just dropped a pre-free agency mock draft, guys, on Monday morning around 4 a.m. Eastern time, because I wanted to get it out there for all of our Bears fans who are working overnight or just might be on the East Coast kind of commuting to work in New York in the morning, if that's still a thing, because no one commutes to work anymore because of COVID, unless you're actually required to be in a place where there's a building. Anyways, though, we're going to get out of this thing. We'll be back on Thursday, and possibly, I don't know when we're going to be back, but I know Thursday for sure, where we'll be uploading videos, okay? So keep it locked in right here, guys. It's a busy time across the NFL. We're going to get out of here. Bear down. Peace out. Please do not hate the Larry Ogunjobi signing unless you absolutely hate Ryan Post. But peace out, guys. Have a good one.